explain to me what a hyperobject is, because I
So
think
there's no one location
vague
where
idea.
global warming happened. It wasn't started in Cincinnati in 1992. It's like the way learning happens, kind of where you do a thing, you do a thing, you do a thing, you do a thing, and boom, now all of a sudden you understand the thing. But like you couldn't say you're 80% there because you can't demonstrate learning until you're 100% there. So it's like, where do you go from uh, a little bit of pollution to then that starts out bottom up, but then through its interactivity tips and becomes bigger than it was.
So this bigger phenomenon is like an emergent real
Right. That
that,
didn't start as an emergent real.
right, so a bunch of disparate, but nonetheless somehow or another connected phenomena
Yeah.
um, this, eventually they reach a threshold, a tipping point, where a new macro level unified thing is real that was
Right.
before. And it has causal powers like global.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so those are hyper objects.
Right. In the sense that, like, if you look for them in a history, you can't kind of pin them down as easily, but they have causal force. Um, and they also can have this weird property of kind of changing over time, right? Like America is
Or the Yankees.
both. Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's a really good, because there is a Yankees. We can touch them, but also like they exist because a totally different group of people
Yeah.
and all those interactions. It's like the way our cells, our body replaces its cells every 7 years or whatever.
Right,
But
right.
we're not like, oh, I'm 7 years old. I have no moments before 7 years ago. So it's the subtlety where if you try to make it too localized, you
Got
lose
it.
some
Got it.
of it. Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you. You helped
Yeah, it's
understand hyper objects a little bit.
well, and then things can exist, right? Like then the virtue of justice can both be absent and present, right? It can be capable and have existed both before and have the possibility in the future, but be completely gone from the universe right now. And you can't really have that in a purely physicalist framework.
Yeah, justice is an abstract thing. It's kind of like equilibrium.
What do you mean?
Equilibrium.
Well, yeah, okay, it took me a moment. Yeah.
Yeah, like you have it literally a physical equilibrium, right? Where you feel upright, your sense of directionality, you don't have vertigo, right? But it's not something that's even phenomenologically present for you except when it's just left you or just returned,
Right, right, right.
right? So the minute you're dizzy, you're out of equilibrium. And the minute you come from dizziness back into not being dizzy, you sense, okay, I have equilibrium again. But right after that, it doesn't exist.
Right, right.
So justice, when there's no injustice going on, it's by default, it's justice. The world is in harmony in some sense.
Right. So we
So
have a negative criteria for something
yeah, there's an
existing.
imbalance in the scales, right, on the model with the blindfold, the
Yeah.
statue. So justice,
Sometimes it's Zeus. Sometimes Zeus holds the scales.
yeah, right, right. Well,
Yeah.
it's this evening. So this is a little injustice. Now we have justice, but once we have it, there's no scales there. You know, we're back to normal again, like equilibrium.
Yeah, it's so fun to think about this stuff. Or like we were talking about in the Plato group, like vision, motion is like 60 static images being composed, and that adds like this new dimension of processing that is an inference but is real. And as soon as it exists, it exerts force back down on the being with like the worst vision. So it's both like a synthesis and a force. But if you slow down and look for it, it disappears, right? Because it's like taking static things and yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It was abstract, but I think I followed that. What comes to mind is a DVD player. If you pause it at 7 minutes and 13 seconds, there's that still image there.
Hmm.
And at 12 seconds is another one, and at 11 seconds. And each one of those images is eternal. They're timeless and they're changeless.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
This is changeless, right? But if this was alive, it would be moving. But in each moment, there'd be something frozen like that.
Right, right, right.
This moment, right? So consciousness in Heraclitus is in the mode of change, right? Is this movement through all of these still
Right.
things.
They bring that up a lot. Yeah.
It's this movement through it. And so like, you know, the cheese, have you ever heard the cheese block model of reality?
No.
Okay, you ever see a big block of like American cheese or Velveeta
Yeah,
cheese,
yeah, yeah.
right? Now compare that with the ones where you buy a big pack, a brick, but they're all individually wrapped in cellophane, right?
Okay.
So they're separated, right?
Yeah.
So each one, if it was separately wrapped, is like a moment in time, frozen, right? This is the cheese block model of time,
Yeah, yeah.
where time is another dimension, right? So like each little, like if you take a deck of cards that has the little images in the corner and you flip the edges, it'll look like a moving character. Do you
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
ever,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. I love those
Same
apps.
thing
Yeah.
with film. If you move the film fast, it looks like she's moving, right?
Right.
Right. So in the cheese block, the character, if it's just me and I'm running, it's like
Yeah, yeah.
in each slice, right? But outside of time, it's like a space-time worm because it's all those things create one big blur, like a worm going through the thing, the space-time worm, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
but now if
That's
you step
great.
outside of time, all of those are there and none of them are moving. It,
Time's perfect, right? Because like
yeah.
a lot of times people will say about eternity and they think it means something like magical. But if you just think about people, right, we have the ability to think about a 5 minute moment of time, 50 years, the history of Rome. In like 2 hours, you could go through the history of Rome and like learn from it. Whereas like an animal that lived through 100 years couldn't learn, like, because they can't synthesize that into like one thought or into a moment. So people have this weird capacity to think about, like, I love watching butterflies and birds because you just feel like they have to be in a different sense of time because they smell you or they see an infrared light or something and they're off and they have no long sense of time. Whereas we're able to go like, oh, I can hunt or I can do something athletic and I'm very immediate and what's happening, I'm just tracking it all and I'm feeling it all. And it's not like a hallucination, but then I can also go, oh, I remember the 30 years of my son's life and this phase and that phase and this phase. And you're kind of in this both. We're capable of being in both, which makes us like have this eternal sense that if you only had kind of your, like, animals move every few minutes. You see, like, you can almost see them in like these little, their working memory is so bound that they predictably will move every like 8 minutes. I love watching animals and you can just kind of wait and they'll eventually start doing something new. None of them like sit still for 8 hours and then do something afterwards. There's a spider that's like, I don't know, 200 million years old that hasn't changed much in time. And scientists have watched it. It looks like it's doing nothing. It's like sitting there stupidly, but then they look at its brain and it's kind of planning, oh, that won't work. Oh, that won't work. That won't work. And then it finally finds a path to like the fly that's stuck on the web. And then it acts all of a sudden. But it's kind of like using its very finite neurochemistry to plan the perfect path based on its information. And that's really advanced compared to a lot of animals who are kind of just in their moment. And we have that capacity too. Yeah.
Yeah, you said a bunch of really
I
interesting.
know. Sorry, it's like a
No, no, but
flow state of facts.
things I want to go back to is the spider web and time and consciousness. So yes,
Yeah.
the level of mentation or mentality or consciousness has something to do with the capacity for time
Mm.
awareness
Yeah,
somehow.
yeah.
right? So yeah, our ability to engage in counterfactual reasoning about the future
Yeah,
or about the past, about Rome. What if Caesar did not cross the Rubicon? How might the,
that's what
so
the spider's doing, right? Counterfactual
right, so we
reasoning.
can do all that, right, and the spider can. But the other thing is, John Vervaeke uses the example of, who was it? That French philosopher. Oh God, I can't think of his name. Marcuse? I forget who.
Merleau-Ponty, maybe.
Merleau-Ponty, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Cane. He feels the blind man who feels the world through his cane, right? So his cane is like his eyes almost.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I do that kind of
Right,
meditation. Yeah.
but yeah, so he's not feeling the cane, he's feeling the world through the cane. The cane has become an extension of his senses.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And he could shift his attention to the cane, and he could, a transparency to opacity shift, or he could switch his
Mm.
attention from the cane to his hand, right? That's another transparency opacity shift, right? Where I'm feeling the cane through my
Oh, the senses as the shift. Oh, that's
yeah,
beautiful, Rick. Yeah.
yeah, right? So the spider's web is like the blind man's cane.
Mm. Oh, the vibrations and stuff. Is that what
He
you're saying?
feels where that bug is, as if the web is an extension of his body.
Oh, yeah. It's like touch. It's using his capacity for like
It's
touch
as
and
if yeah, it's as if the web is an extension of his fingers or something like that. When I
yeah,
drove a
yeah,
tractor trailer for years, I felt every little bump in the back of the trailer as I was
yeah,
turning.
yeah, yeah.
It was an extension of my body.
Touch is like the lost sense in our
Yeah.
hyper linguistic, hyper visual world. Yeah, I love touch. Like we've talked about like the child like feeling the sand and feeling the sun on your face. And I was um I was
Embodied.
elliptical.
That's the 4E stuff.
Yeah, yeah, but it sounds like a construct when you say, oh, embodiment. Like I have a body, of course I'm embodied. But what you're like the
No,
feeling
no,
of
what I mean
touch.
is you're literally your consciousness as a body. When you're in
Hmm.
your body and using your body and feeling the world through your body, the way animals do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Spider feels the web, the way the blind man feels the world through the cane, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
You're
no, my
extending the extended mind through your body and through others.
uh-huh. Yeah, that's what's so great about observation, right? Because you're not just tracking um the task, but you're getting to see their body do the task. Um, yeah, I was gonna say I was doing this elliptical training the other day, and I've been doing a lot of like apophatic meditation where I'm like, I'm not this, I'm not that, and I just kind of get in this state where I've like de-identified with all the mental chatter, and it just kind of stops. And I was doing that while I was running a little bit, and then I will visualize sometimes or like focus on something, and instead of it doing a visualization, I just kind of like got the feeling of silence and then kind of projected it in front of me, and then like opened up the feeling of silence, and then did the same thing like to my left, and it was just like this profound bliss because the whole world was in front of me, but I was like processing it as like a an empty space of silence rather than as like a visual field, even though like I didn't lose touch with my visual field at all, but it was almost like I turned on this mode. It was like, oh yeah, there like you can kind of imagine becomes like this visual world, but you can imagine silence or imagine texture. I do like a smell practice where I'll just smell 15 objects, and all of a sudden you're like, well, I can remember smells better and I can hold them in my mind better. But if you don't do that, it just becomes all this visual or linguistic. Yeah, it was really fun. I just Eckhart kind of inspires me to do these apophatic things, and my father was blind, so I kind of appreciate blindness. And sometimes I'm like, oh, he could feel this, like, oh, I could feel this thing that I'm touching, and that would be like a shared experience. Um, so it's
Did you say Eckhart inspired you?
yeah, yeah, because he's very apophatic. Like he rejects symbols and rejects the past in some ways, and rejects what people will call holy, kind of like Bodhidharma does that really well as well. Um, and it's like then you fill it with something, right? If you just reject, and then you're just like this emptiness, and then you fill it with some new thought. Um, it's very like I did it with silence though. It was kind of fun. Uh,
Yeah, you know, the silence thing that you did sounds like using the imaginal in a way that literally opens up something real. That's
oh, it was so real. Yeah, I was so in the moment. I was so like in the space I was in my body. Like my body was like on fire of good, like a blissful fire or whatever. And
yeah,
yeah, but I was so in body. It wasn't like a non-localized bliss. It was very much like in my muscles and my nervous system, and very aware of like people around me and what was happening. Not like, yeah.
yeah. Now, how do you classify that as a meditative experience? And I'm hearkening back now to the problematic thing about the typologies of meditation, you know? That's just one out of an infinite number of possible experiences that somebody can have by just playing around with their consciousness, their
Yeah,
senses,
yeah, yeah.
their imagination, and all that. And it's all valid. It's all very interesting stuff.
Well, and especially if it's helping attune you to the real or shut down maladaptive parts of your subpersonality is like this depth therapist I started working with has been fantastic because he's just making me appreciate um dreams and images and experiences, and he's like validating these kind of things or giving me new ideas, and so um and he kind of says too, like there's no institutions where this knowledge sits anymore, and that's part of the problem is that 300 years ago to be in England or be in Germany and have these experiences and then go talk with them with like a religious order, or like in he's not really as into Asian stuff, but like other people will say, oh yeah, this exists in India or in Tibet or in Japan, but just not in the West. So we have no cultural cognitive grammar or organizational resources.
Except within monastic communities. Yeah,
Yeah, that's the problem when you just drop out of a society. And
right.
uh, I would love to do that, but then how would my mom get the money that I earned to take care of her? You know?
Yeah, there's an interesting thing about one of that same mentor who told me about his friend, the lawyer with the 51 fallacies. He said he went to grad school with another guy who wrote his dissertation. It was kind of anthropology, cultural anthropology, called The Chosen People, where he compared Judaism and Catholicism um, in this one respect. So in Judaism, rabbis can have wives and children, and they study the Talmud and the Torah, and they analyze it to interpret it, and so they cultivate all those skills, which is why, and they pass on those genes. The ones who are good at it become prominent rabbis, they have
Mm,
congregations and whatnot, and they pass those genes on, and their children study, you know, it's a monastic philosophical analytic style of reading the Talmud and everything, and what
yeah,
the
yeah.
theologian debates and all. Whereas in Catholicism, those individuals who are born with that gene that predisposes them to monastic work, they can't reproduce. So every single generation in Catholicism it weeded out genetically from the genetic pool
Yeah.
the theological gene.
Yeah, this safety net to like keep perverts from preying on communities actually like had a long-term consequence of damaging the intellectual capacity of the entire gene pool.
Genetic pool, yeah.
Yeah. That's
It's
what's interesting about sex and religion, because there's different
constantly.
bent sects that are anti and pro, and it's not just black and white like you're saying. Like there's uh
Just fascinating stuff. I don't remember why I brought that up.
that's a cool fact, definitely. Um it's interesting though because
When you were saying you can't just go off and become a monastic, that made me think about why we have this big division in our culture between, you know, the monastics and the seculars.
mhm.
Whereas in Judaism, like almost everybody's father is a rabbi or something, you know.
Oh yeah, I've never thought about that. It's like they create that sacred caste in Catholicism much more than in Judaism. Hmm, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It's so unhealthy having like that's part of you know, heaven forbid, like that's part of the problem of Christ. When you worship a man as a god, you really distort things down below. I was reading Porphyry or Procholus's criticism of the Christians, and there's like some really good Neoplatonists that have these treaties against Christians, and I just assumed they were kind of like atheist arguments. But his argument, have you read it before?
No.
It's like he was mad because they were not worshiping like the Father enough. It was almost the opposite of an atheist argument, because he goes, you know, there's a divine man that if you're only worshiping this mortal, uh, then you're missing this huge element of like the symbolic aspect of philosophical practices.
Yeah, you're worshiping the faucet and not the water.
Right, right. And the water is,
Yeah, not the reservoir, only the spout that the water's coming out of the water fountain.
yeah, and it's such a different argument than saying like you're stupid, I don't like you, which is uh Gnostics as well. Like John's pretty harsh to Gnostics in his series,
Yeah.
but other people aren't. And then if I'm too loyal to John, I might miss that, like, oh, there's actually some really interesting subtle things. These people are much richer than I would have thought they were if I only followed him and not the logos.
Absolutely, yeah. Prior to my exposure to John, the only criticisms that I ever came across of the Gnostics were from the non-Gnostic theologians who want the authority of the church, or from the atheists who say it's all in their imagination. They're not
Yeah, 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 yeah. The
they're not
atheist makes sense.
experiencing
Yeah.
anything. That's it. So now John has this kind of unique criticism of the Gnostics with the demiurge and all this weird occultist, whatever. I don't even really completely understand John's criticisms of the Gnostics because I never had that view of them.
Well, he
I
wants gnosis without the Gnostics, and he doesn't like the Gnostics, but he's okay with
I
gnosis.
believe in gnosis, and I think that anybody who experiences gnosis is a Gnostic, right?
Right. I think that definition is what like Corban would say too. And like I like that as well. If you're practicing like a Buddhist, I don't care what you call yourself, you're a Buddhist. Like
Yeah,
you
yeah.
have a Gnostic.
If you've had some kind of experiential encounter with this deeper reality, this
Yeah, yeah.
mystical ground of being, whatever, call it whatever you want to call it, no thingness, the all, the one, the logos, nous, Brahman, I don't care what you
Mhm.
call
The
it.
archetypes, yeah, like the
Yeah,
archetypes of
whatever it
revelation.
is that you, then you, if you've had that direct, immediate experience of that, which is self-validating,
Right.
it's experienced as more real than real. You've had a Gnostic experience. That's
Hmm.
what gnosis means. It means
Right.
immediate knowing. It means immediate, direct knowing of ultimate reality.
Yeah, that's the Platonic revelation. That's what I like,
Yeah. So
revelatory experience. Yeah, it's very
so
interesting.
that's what's touched me and made me, who I am in my life. The fact that I had some of those experiences. So I have
Hmm.
a lot of respect for Gnosticism. But one of the problems with Gnosticism, I guess, is historically certain Gnostic lineages in the
Hmm.
European tradition or the whatever Eurasian tradition that John is
Yeah.
critiquing, have had these weird, whatever it is that their mindset or their ideology or their doctrines are things that John disagrees with. And I don't know enough about what
Well,
he.
and they have a paranoid worldview sometimes, at least according to John, and I don't blame him for wanting to distance from people that think spooky things are controlling the world in ways
Oh,
that
right,
probably
right,
are. I think
right.
that's what his criticism is.
Right. Some of the Gnostics have that kind of view.
Right, that they're trapped in an evil
Yeah,
prison.
that the creator God is some kind of evil demiurge.
Right, right, right. He's a trickster.
You're like a brain in a vat. You're like in a simulated world run by this
Hmm.
demonic being. Yeah,
Right, the demon argument. Yeah,
that's kind of crazy. Yeah,
yeah. That's what John.
yeah.
That's Gnostics to him.
Okay, right. But to me, Gnosticism doesn't require that. Like the Gnostic Gospels, let's just say, those early documents from all those other followers of Jesus that were
Right, right.
that were removed in the Council of Nicaea, and from whatever his name was, that emperor. When the Orthodox and the Catholics separated, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
carving up the religion and eliminating texts that didn't support their doctrine,
That's so interesting.
like
Yeah.
Mary Magdalene, the text from her, from these other people. Those things are really fascinating and interesting. They're people who presumably had Gnostic experiences.
Hmm.
But just like anybody else, like any religion on earth, was presumably, or any spiritual tradition, any shamanistic tradition,
Hmm.
was some individual encountering some deeper alternate reality. Whether or not they were imagining something or really experiencing something, we have to take it all with a grain of salt and use your
Well,
own.
that's why you want the what is the systematic balancing, right? Like you intuition, John might discount intuition if we call all these things kind of intuitive opening ups.
Right.
And then you want to have the cognitive and the discerning, noticing in the real world, uh, sensing, right? You want your senses to make sense, and your intuitions, and your memory and cognition, and in a group when it's all harmonizing.
Multiple sources of information
Right,
in Indian philosophy and Indian epistemology. They call these things cognitive instruments. Let's
right,
just
right, right.
Pramanas is the word in Sanskrit. Self
Okay,
observation, inference, memory, analogy. These are all different sources of epistemic avenues.
right, right. Yeah,
And
the
the
Buddhists are
more
much better. The Indians are much better.
Yeah, and the more of them that you have that integrate around a claim, the more likely it is to be true.
So yeah, so they also have like a kind of a convergence argument where it's like, okay, my gnosis needs to also meet my perception, and when the that stuff is lining up, that's where the truth is.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love I we're like in the like born too early phase of when like all this Buddhism logic will like filter through the Western world, because it was Alexander the Great was like right there, right? Like he was right on the verge of India, and had he went, 800 miles deeper, we would just live in a different world because all those worlds would talk. And to like as I learn more about Buddhism and try to like not take it so mythologically, there's so much wisdom and thinking and logic and nuance in people that you, oh, I don't like Dogen, he's too this, or I don't like the Nagarjuna, he's too that. But if like there's so much good, interesting uh thinkers who could be synthesized with the greatest Western thinkers and the greatest Greek thinkers, that once like maybe it will be an AI, maybe it'll be some kind of AI that says, oh, Socrates has the most overlap with this Swami and this Shinto guy and this Native American guy, and they're all actually much closer than we would pin them. Because yeah, no, this is so the sensor stuff you were saying. Even and I'm starting to learn more about Raja Yoga, and they're actually very Western. You can read the Raja Yoga treatises on concentration and thinking in a very congruent way to what we describe those terms as. Um, if you're not mystified by the differences and then kind of like self isolated by being too within the tradition. Uh,
What Raja Yoga stuff are you reading?
well, the Japanese yoga I do, he studied with a like an Indian based. He was not in India, but in like an Indian based person. So it has, and they spoke only in I think Japanese. So the Indian guy had to turn everything into Japanese to teach this guy who spoke English and Japanese. And so then this guy took it out of there, but rewrote everything in Japanese and English. So all of these yogic ideas are much more Japanese and English language based. But then now I'm just going back. I can pull up the book really
No, that's
quickly.
okay. I
But
was just
yeah, and then I'm learning more about like trying to find good sources of Raja Yoga, because like when in high school people talk about karma or whatever, and then you go, oh, whatever, that's something. But now that I'm like practicing it through this Japanese art, I'm like, oh, what's Raja Yoga about? Let me try to incorporate some of that deeper into my Japanese yoga.
Swami Vivekananda. Have you heard of
That
him?
that might be the book. Yeah, let me pull it up real quick.
He is like the leading Raja Yoga expounder. He
Yep,
was
that's the book I have. Yep, it's called Raja Yoga: Conquering the Internal Nature.
by Vivekananda.
Yep, by
Okay.
uh, Vivekananda,
Yeah.
Swami. Yeah,
Yeah. Viveka means discrimination, and Ananda is bliss. So it's enlightenment or just or bliss through using your intellect. Vivekananda.
yeah. No, that's what we practice in this Japanese yoga. Yeah.
Yeah, Vivekananda was the lead devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, who was a Vedantist, a
Okay.
saint, and considered an enlightened being.
Wow.
Um, yeah, I was
Yeah,
very.
Vedanta sounds awesome. It sounds really fruitful.
I read a lot of and was very impressed and taken by by Ramakrishna and Vivekananda when I first started on this path.
Yeah, it's awesome because I'd read a little bit of like the yogic Indian stuff, and it was so hard to relate to. It was so like mythological and about glowing Brahmin and raping weaker castes and weird stuff that it just like I couldn't track it. But now that I've practiced a lot of meditation, not a lot, but like some meditation, and especially like again, it's kind of cool that this Indian tradition had to be communicated in Japanese, and their language is super concrete, and they don't even allow you to say like Rick is thinking. They'd say it seems like Rick is thinking because they respect the internality of people in ways that like it's hard to even translate into English. So like when it filtered through to Japanese, it did it really in a cool way, and then again it had to filter into English because this practice is, I'm learning from an English guy who speaks Japanese and reads Japanese, but even he's not like a thinking in Japanese all the time. So it's really, I'm lucky because I'm getting it kind of filtered in these really good ways. They go, oh, now I know some yogic principles, and it makes way more sense than if I just started like when I tried before.
Well, if you like Raja Yoga, you should also at some point read Patanjali Yoga Sutras.
Okay, let's write that down.
Patanjali Yoga Sutras. That's written about 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. No, yeah, India is so amazing because like even in the dialogue, Socrates at some point, I think I said this, like he talks to Egyptian people about Egypt, and this Egyptian guy goes like, "Oh, you Greeks are so young." He just is like, because the Greeks get real proud and real confident, and they kind of should be because their art is stellar, their philosophy is like amazing. Um, but it's funny because you go back to like there was cultures 10, 15,000 years ago, probably 50, 80,000 years ago, that they might have left only oral records or on like not ropes. Like the Tao, I read this article that like the earliest Taoist ideas were written on like fire baked turtle shells. So they were taking turtle shells and using some kind of heat to like imprint symbols on them to preserve the writing. And clearly, like if there was 8 times as many verses of the Tao Te Ching, they're not around anymore. There's no 2,000-year-old turtle shell uh, that's capturing these ancient practices and these ancient insights and things like that. So yeah, it's fascinating. Even in dialogue, this guy Eric that I've been talking with, he brought up, and I'd never appreciated, like other ancient cultures were as big on dialogue as Plato, and like we're all monologue. It's all about just okay, give the speaker, everyone hush, the president is speaking, even compared to Britain where they'd argue more publicly. Hush, hush, hush. And so the idea that like, no, we only transmit wisdom through dialogue seemed like more normal maybe 5 to 8,000 years ago. But again, all that's lost to the Western world.
Yeah, I would imagine that, well, the larger part of human history is hunter-gatherer, 99% of human history, you
Hmm.
know, hundreds of thousands of years,
Hmm.
hunter-gatherers. Agricultural revolution, 12,000 years ago. You know what I mean? So it's like 90 something percent of human history is pre agricultural. So we were
Uh-huh.
always nomadic and whatnot, following the bison herd and all this kind of thing,
Yeah, yeah.
hunting, gathering. So when did we sit around talking? At night around the campfire when we were eating, and that was all verbal. So
Yeah, and mythological and charming.
looking at a
And
fire and shadows and it's dark out and talking, and then that's when the stories come out, you know, that get passed on. So dialogue and fire watching. I love watching. I have a fire pit that I built in my backyard, and
yeah, yeah, you told me this. Yeah.
we did it last night. We just sat out there looking at the fire, hanging out and whatever. It was really nice. It's mesmerizing. It's in our genes.
Mm. Yeah, why is there a reaction to that that's so
Sitting around the
soothing? Yeah.
fire and talking and eating around the fire.
Yeah, sacred meals, like the communal. Yeah, it's so powerful. I would love to just be a part of like a academy that did that and just live this lifestyle, or even how to turn it into, because now you can do a VR. There's a place in Michigan State in their library. They bought this like $5 million screen in this room that's maybe the size of a nice living room, and it's just a wall-to-wall screen. So you could generate like a nightscape and put a fire in there and bring in like 30 students and go through rituals in this kind of like virtual space and do all sorts of creative. So you could, have you can have them grokking all sorts of interesting things to experience through this kind of primitive
Yeah,
lens.
VR is going to be a really exciting thing, augmented reality in the future. I have an Oculus machine that
Oh yeah, yeah.
my friend, my partner in the knowledge coin thing, he bought that for me recently as a like a birthday present or something. I put
Nice.
it on, I tried it, but I just don't have the time to play with those things. Um, but it's
Well,
really
yeah, it's so powerful, especially if it was used for wisdom practices
yeah.
or for learning. That's what,
That's what we said. Eventually, he said, "I bought this for you because, like in the 2.0 or 3.0 version of Knowledge Coin, we're going to be doing a lot of VR work. We're going to have you having VR experiences with Socrates and all those people.
Yeah, yeah. Imagine,
VR
yeah, I
spirit.
wrote a research paper in a diversity class about, and what if you had to put on a headset and look in a mirror in the virtual world and be black or be a woman, and or every person that you talk to became like a black woman. Like there would be psychological impact in that.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I've said this to my students. Like, here's a thought experiment. Wouldn't you like to be able to go into a VR or like an experience machine? You put a helmet on and it completely takes over your consciousness so that it's like a matrix fake world, but you
uh,
experience it as if it's real. Wouldn't you want to then go in, as, let's say, as a cisgender straight guy and be a woman
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and experience what it's like, or be a trans woman?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, this would really create cognitive empathy.
It's so weird. I like back in the 2001, I would play, like, go to those chat rooms when they first popped up in the internet, or play like poker in these Yahoo chat rooms, and I naively picked the name Beach Bunny something because I lived near the beach. I'm like, oh, that's a cool name. It might have suggested it. I don't remember how it happened, but then like people would flirt with me, and then it dawned on me, oh, they think I'm a woman who's calling herself Beach Bunny, and then I'm getting treated differently because in this virtual space, people think I'm a woman.
Right.
And I had like the first person experience of like, what the heck is happening? This is so
There's that Black Mirror
alien.
episode. Did you see that Black Mirror episode where the two black guys who are friends meet in a VR world as fighters, but one of them takes a woman's body and they're karate players and they're
Yeah,
fighting
yeah.
with VR, and but like then like they get really close up and personal, and then like they start making out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've seen sci-fi
Remember that?
movies like that. Yeah. It's like,
Yeah,
I have
that
an
was an
erection.
episode.
What's going on here? This is
That
my
was
friend Steve.
an episode of Black Mirror. It was really incredible. Yeah.
That's what's so interesting about how our brain categorizes, and then immediately it just says not attractive, not attractive, not a target of love, not a. But then if you're in the visual stimulus,
Yeah.
you don't. And yeah, it's so. Imagine if you were like some jerk, like a racist jerk, and the judge finds you like 100 hours of VR pretending to be, like you said, like a homosexual black woman,
Right.
and
Right.
you're like, oh, I'm gonna be nice forever to that type of person.
That's a great
um,
sentence. I love that sentence.
but that's like, it's so psychological. And VR, they have you seen augmented reality? They have for like what is the place? Uh almost said Kinko's. What's the first IKEA?
The furniture
IKEA.
store? Yeah.
Yeah, the furniture store. They have like, you can buy furniture and you put on these augmented glasses, and it'll track like, oh, you have the leg and the screws, and it'll superimpose an arrow to like point you towards where you should put the leg in, and then
Oh,
where the
really?
dowels should go. Yeah, so it like overlays
Oh, that's
logic and
awesome.
intelligence based on what you're seeing, so you can build the thing by hand.
Oh,
Yeah. So if you could do that and be like, don't be it.
I'm much more
Yeah.
inclined to buy something from IKEA now, and I can put it together easily.
Right, right. And it's all like, you're gonna have less returns, higher customer satisfaction.
That's
There's
brilliant.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They do it on a real high level. So like Boeing will let their technicians use these things, probably the Air Force, like they keep that stuff quiet. But yeah, they made it for, it's awesome for training, because you have someone that takes like 2 years to learn a training, but this tech can cut it down by 40% and lower the error rate. So they do it a lot with like high level engineering. And then IKEA just took it and ran with it on a simpler
That's
level.
amazing. That's amazing.
Augmented reality and VR have like, that's why I think Meta or Facebook or whatever was so excited, because they got excited about this stuff of what it could do.
Yeah.
And now the whole rest of the world hasn't really caught on yet. But um, yeah, the potential for perspectival and procedural knowing are way better. And then you don't even need propositional stuff, because it could literally, with your knowledge base, tag stuff in your visual field and then pull up the propositions you need to know. So like propositional knowledge might be the most worthless in the augmented world.
That's fine with me.
Yeah, yeah. More time to appreciate experience rather than
Yeah.
know things.
Experiential learning is kind of Gnostic in a way. So,
It is, yeah, yeah. It's interesting when you can combine best practices and like zones of practical learning, because experiential learning can go haywire wrong. You can waste so many hours, like memorization and drilling outperform bad experiential learning, like not even close.
right, that's true.
um, but yeah, the good versions can cut down error rates and do, again, like just the idea of, oh, I didn't know how boring it would be to be a researcher, but I went into like 100-hour VR lab and felt boredom, and then didn't pick that career field or whatever. I went into the nursing VR field for 100 hours and found it compelling.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. That reminds me also of I think it was another Black Mirror episode where these people do. I don't know if you've seen the Black Mirror episodes.
No, no, but I know all about it. I've had
Oh,
friends that have like just
you
loved
really
it.
should watch them. You would love them. There was
Yeah,
this couple, a bunch of different people, but what was going on in this program was you would, like, somehow or another, you'd be read all your attributes by the system, and then you would put on a like a a VR thing, and it would pair you with other people that it had read, the system, having done all this analyses of different people,
yeah, yeah,
would have you in a simulated dating relationships
yeah, yeah.
candidates who were close in proximity to you, and you'd have these relationships with them, before you found out whether or not you clicked with them.
Yeah, yeah, you can go on a virtual date with
Yeah, yeah,
someone and then
virtual,
reject
yeah,
them.
all kinds of.
Wow.
It's really interesting, just to make you think about the possible
Yeah,
future.
yeah. Helen Fisher, she's a social psychologist, and she worked with eHarmony, and analyzed like 8,000 people or 8 million people's data, and then found these patterns that just weren't in the literature, and it, like, helped optimize their matching process, increasing satisfaction and all this stuff. Yeah, it's really fascinating because personality is so subtle and mostly intuitive. But if you get this good data science, um, you go, oh, that was the pattern. It wasn't just like hotness and richness that were dominating the data field, the dating
Right.
field. Um,
Right.
oh, that's so weird to imagine. Like, oh, you're only 12% likely to enjoy talking to Rick, so you might as well go find a better friend or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I, these things will all be helpful in the future. Of course, there's always.
Well, it just depends, right? It will the ethics win in the end, right? It's because
Oh yeah. Well, that's the Bostrom. Have you ever heard of Nick Bostrom's argument about simulation?
no.
Okay, he says there's three propositions that we need to think about. That our ability to simulate, to create simulated worlds, like in the future, let's just say social scientists will actually program all the historical knowledge that we have about Caesar's crossing the Rubicon, but run variations where he doesn't, right? So we're going to do these counterfactual simulations. So for everything we want to know, like Hitler did this, and we have all this information, right? Was it?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
there's 1,000 things that Hitler did that seem to be pivotal causally, right? So for
Uh,
each one of them, we're going to run that he didn't do that, he did this. So like 100 different alternatives for that one, and run future simulations for every single node in the Hitler network, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or any individual, like we put somebody in the simulation thing who we said this is your you were a racist, so now you got to go become a black homosexual woman, right? But we run all the simulations, so like in the future, social science research and psychological research will all be done in simulations, right? Where for every little variable we wanted, we have 1,000 alternatives that we run, right? And we have big data analyzing it and all
Yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah.
So at one point, he says, there'll be more simulations than real people because anybody with a lot of equipment, any kind of researcher will be running simulations not only on climate, on psychology, on everything, right?
Right, right.
Like, so there'll come a time in the future of human science where, let's say, for every real person, there will be 1 trillion simulations of that person, let's just say, right? And so then the argument is something like this: when that's the case, the odds of you being real are 1 trillion to 1. And if you're in a simulation that's a really well designed one, you'll never know.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? So if the odds are 1 trillion to 1, then that's like realistically thinking you're not a real person, right? So that's one of the epistemic problems. But the other thing with the three propositions that he says goes like this: either humanity won't live long enough because we're so self-destructive
Mm-hmm.
to get to the point where we can do that,
Mm-hmm.
or we develop the ability to do it. So there's two alternatives where we develop. So we don't live long enough to develop that ability. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
But B and C, B we live long enough, and C we live long enough. But B we develop it before we're mature enough to be ethical about it.
Mm-hmm.
Or C we develop it when we are mature enough to be ethical about it. Right. So the problem is B. Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, if we
We're
have
kind of in that problem right now. Yeah.
yeah, if we have that, if we cultivate this ability, then like any kid with an iPhone that has the app can create simulated beings in simulated worlds and play with them, like the way a kid plays with insects or something,
Yeah, yeah.
and just, torturing beings for fun. And there's a Black Mirror episode about that too.
Yeah,
That's why I know you'd love that show.
yeah.
But like realistically, he thinks Like, look at how we've been with all the power we've developed so far prior to us being mature enough to handle it.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, and we are on the cusp of super AI and super simulations.
Right, right. No, it's these are sci-fi themes all the time,
Yeah,
and there was a Total Recall reboot. I don't know if you saw it, but like
did.
the character goes into it and forgets he's in it. He
Right.
doesn't realize most of the movie he's thinks he's outside of the simulation while he's in the
Yeah,
simulation. And
that's what's
there's
great about Total Recall. Even the original one with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
mm,
Do you remember this one scene? My favorite scene from that movie was when
mm.
he's not in the simulation, but his enemies are trying to convince him that he is, and that
Oh, right.
he's having an aneurysm, but an avatar was sent in to help him symbolically. If you take the red pill or whatever, that will help with the. Otherwise, you might be permanently lost.
Right, right, where you
He's
lose
like, and he
capacity
shoots
to.
the guy. He says, simulations don't sweat or something like that, and he
Oh, yeah, I remember
shoots
that
the
thing.
guy, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But a really
But
good
that's real,
simulation.
yeah, because technology, it seduces you into the simulacrum. That's a good word. It's like an old-fashioned word.
Yeah.
Um, and it's 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 so funny because it's exactly what John says. It's parasitic processing, and we've actually like we used to be a predator and a prey, and then we became an alpha predator, and now we've alpha predatored ourselves, and we're in this paradoxical relationship with ourselves where our economy and our political structure incentivizes individuals and groups to prey on the group. And like we were saying, like if ethics means the best society loves itself and
Yeah.
loves each other, we've actually done the opposite. And we're like, no, it's good to lie to people to get them to work hard and work away their lives and spend their money on nonsense. And it's good to waste your energy on being a political identity, although that matters like almost nothing when you ignore it. And like we've caged ourselves in our clever shamanistic powers to kind of groupthink our world, and now it's like what was the Bruce Willis movie where like there's all these clones and robots and they have these like tech free zones, um and it's like, oh, you're one of those tech free zone people and you're like kind of looked down upon because you have to go to these kind of like hippie festivals of no technology, and then they find out like this dreadlock wearing uh kind of charming guru is actually like a robot or something. So the whole
If you remember the name of that movie, send it to me.
yeah, yeah, I'm just blanking, but I'll
Yeah.
definitely
When it
it's
comes to you, you'll email me.
yeah, yeah, it's tip of the tongue. It's a great movie. It's called like Clones or something. Like I'll find it and email you. But yeah, that's a common trope is the like falling for your own illusion through the good technology that we've developed. And ironically, like
It's,
concentration training is what's like one of the best deterrents of that, like because it's the way they seduce you is by overstimulating and like hijacking your novelty and your pleasure seeking. But if you could concentrate well, like a Zen master, you'd go, "Oh, this is bullshit. Get away from me, Facebook, or get away from me, Google."
yeah, cognitive autonomy, your ability to maintain control over your own awareness is a very
Mm,
big skill that we all need right now while these big AI data analyzing, marketing algorithms that are designed to capture our consciousness are out to get us on a daily basis. And it's infiltrating everything.
yeah, and ethics is hard to teach too. So it's like easier said than done to teach young people or ourselves to start making better decisions, because it's really like the I mean, like I worked with like some of the best data scientists, the young best data scientists who were getting jobs at Google and Facebook, and they're like 25 or 30 and so happy to be working at these companies, and then start making these high tech algorithms that just hijack your
Hijack.
salience
Yeah.
and A/B test their way into like a kind of purgatory or whatever for us. And Google bought this MIT researchers small company, and this guy kind of could track like the first instance of a word, and you could kind of look at the history of, oh, this is when Trump derangement syndrome started, or when hipster started being used. And so if you can kind of find the origin of a social phenomenon, you have this kind of very powerful knowledge, because then you can kind of, what do they call it, where they like kind of A/B test movies endings and go, oh, this is the popular crowd ending, or politicians go, oh, we're gonna hit the road or make America great, and they kind of learn how to hijack people's thinking through these training, and so Google has this technology. They can literally say like, oh, here are the 5 most likely phrases that will get someone elected, or these are the phrases that seem to have
Yeah.
turned into this.
It's
And
using AI and data analysis for sophistry.
right, yeah, it's so, yeah, and it's so weird because, yeah, in business, the business school, they're the least interested in ethics anywhere. They're the most condescending, and uh
Like those students of mine. It's like kosher ham. It's an oxymoron.
yeah, yeah.
Business ethics. Business is survival of the fittest. That's the ideology.
And it feels so right. That's the
It's
problem
a
with that.
zero
It
sum
feels like such
game.
a
It's a zero
mm,
sum game. It's a competition. Who's smarter at it? That's all.
being a loving employer, or being treating your I almost say consumer, but treating like the people that buy your products with integrity and respect, like treating them as like intelligent beings, is it's totally possible, and businesses have done it well,
Yeah.
but it's such a minority.
The CEO of Whole Foods, I mean, it's owned
Yeah,
by Amazon now, but I don't know if you've ever seen any of his talks.
yeah,
He,
yeah, yeah. I know Trader Joe also was kind of interesting for a
yeah,
long time.
yeah, like he says, look, happy staff, happy employees makes for happy customers, which makes for happy shareholders and happier communities. You know, it's a positive, it's a virtuous cycle. The
Right, right, and it's data driven. Yeah, it's a very people that work 45 hours a week perform like they work 60 hours a week, because 60-hour a week workers are burnt out, miserable, fatigued mentally. But it's again, it's like this numbers race where you have to enact the good behaviors. Yeah, the turnover is lower. It takes so like 100 grand on average to train a knowledge worker, and it takes about a year of time. So if you have this kind of like treat your employee well ethic, you're not only going to probably hire better people because there's this signal in the market that says you're an awesome company, but
right.
you're actually retaining more knowledge, training people with way higher impact per dollar. Um, but it's a cultural norm that like, no, survival of the fittest makes sense. That's, I see IBM and they have to beat Dell and China and Google, and yeah, that makes sense. We're all dinosaurs trying to not die. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I've never liked ethics more after I've read more uh, just of like Platonic works and done more meditation, and it's kind of funny because I never disliked ethics and always thought it was kind of interesting. And I think I've always liked people enough not to be like a horrible person, but it really almost makes like the only sense once you take like the idea of it's tyranny and you're the victim of it, or it's good and everyone's wins. Like you were saying earlier, just like I am you and everyone is me. Uh,
Yeah.
uh,
We don't have to treat social interaction and economic interaction and political interaction like zero sum games. If we work together, everybody benefits. It's a win-win thing. But you
do you
know,
know Dauscher Keltner's work?
no.
He's a social psych guy at Berkeley, and he's written books on goodness and power. Do you know Ekman's 7 emotions, like surprise,
I don't,
disgust?
yeah, but I don't remember. I've read about it, but that was a few years ago. I don't remember.
Yeah, Ekman's awesome because like the FBI used him, and it was like a
Yeah.
huge, like 100,000 150 culture sample, 100,000 person, 150 culture sample,
Yeah, yeah.
rock solid. So this Dasher Keltner guy is one of his students, and he's written like 5 bestsellers on how generosity leads to power. It's very on topic of what we talked about, and I like him because I like to contemplate on emotions, and like same way you do the view from above, or that other weird meditation I told you about, like the visualizing silence around you. Like I'll just try to like visualize the blood patterns of joy. And Ekman's research has done a lot of that because they've done body scanning and brain scanning. And this Keltner guy has, instead of 7 motions, he has like 28. So he really gets much more nuanced. So I love his work. I always ruled out being a social psychologist because it's impossible to get a job while I was in school and grad school and stuff. But I pay attention to him, and he really writes awesomely on how virtue is profitable, to kind of keep it on the business language side, because kind of like reciprocal, like there's some good in the last 4 or 5 years.
What's his name?
Evolution, Dasher Keltner, Dachherkeltner. He's at Berkeley.
Dachser.
Dachher.
Oh, Dacher. Kelpner.
Yeah, Keltner. Yeah, Keltner. He has a YouTube video on like why awe is so important. He worked with Pixar's Inside Out, if you know that movie. So yeah, he's really popular and has done a lot of research on positive emotions, but positive almost sounds watered down. Like he's into like goodness and awe, um, and he's a student of Ekman, so it's good stuff.
Cool. Yeah, I have a friend who's trying to create some kind of ethics platform
Yeah,
for businesses and whatnot to encourage this kind of attitude. So I'm going to recommend that to him.
yeah, he's awesome. He's a really good writer. He's got pretty high standards for his scientific method and stuff, and yeah, I love it because emotions are such a slippery topic. But if you can factor analyze human behavior into these kind of like observable multicultural constructs that you can kind of trust, like, oh, surprise is universal. I'm not gonna get lost in like romance, but surprise I can buy or whatever.
You know Jonathan Haidt?
Oh, I love him. Man. He's
Yeah, he
great.
does the universality of moral emotions and stuff like
Oh
that.
yeah, his exactly. He's very similar kind of thinker,
Yeah.
in the way he just looks at things so cross culturally and with such a high standard for the truth. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, Jonathan Haidt's excellent because he really, same way, he says, look, this is what we're looking at here, and here's how I see it, as like a caring father with a critical mind who happens to be a researcher. Uh,
Yeah, what was that book? The Righteous Mind. Did you ever read
mm-hmm.
that?
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
good book. He created, well, him and his co-author there, I forget his other name, but created the Heterodox Academy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Are you part of that?
I'm a member of it, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's
But we had a
awesome.
meeting recently that he was there, and we was only
Oh
about
wow.
a dozen of us online. It was nice, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Heterodox is great because it gives a counter argument to kind of like the bipolar left and right
Yeah.
system that we're in, and it's got this momentum. Like it's pretty popular.
Yeah, his insights were really rich in that book. All of his work is really insightful.
Yeah, it's cool how he can just take things that you kind of can't disagree with and just walk you through an argument and go, ah, here it is, and you're like, oh, I see what you see now. This is so great.
Yeah, yeah, he's really good at that. What I also like about him is his relaxed, clear-minded demeanor.
Yeah, yeah, he's not panicking. Yeah, he doesn't have this like, he never uses the word meaning crisis or
Yeah, he
uh
has a very
tragedy.
calm, clear, lucid, and you sense the wakefulness in his
Mm-hmm.
consciousness. There's just a way about him that his authenticity is like transparent.
Right, right.
I think even people who disagree with him who are more locked into these politically polarized views of us good guys, them bad guys on both sides, I think they have to sense that, there's something honest and sincere about him. And yet, that's optimism on my part and maybe naive, because I have friends who are really brilliant philosophers who are more politically charged and who've accused him of being some kind of a shill for conservatives.
There's something about our brain that we're able to just take a myth and override everything we see,
Yeah,
just everything. There's a famous psychology study where like a tsunami hits and wipes out like a village in Malaysia, and like the Catholic guy says God saved the 8 people, and the Protestant guy says it's the Protestant God, and they all just kind of tweak the facts 8 degrees in their own direction. They agree on almost everything, but they can't quite get away from their own point of view. They can't leave it be this neutral phenomenon. They have to overwrite and just drop their opinion in on it. And we just have that mythological overlay that is so subtle. I think that's one of the strengths of trying to have this kind of religion of no religion, which again becomes a religion, but trying to be a little more agnostic about your interpretations and say like, oh, I don't agree with everything Jonathan Haidt is doing, but if I look at him with clear eyes, I have to describe it this way and give him some merit. Or whereas if I'm just a little more, oh no, he's this category, somehow I can wipe away all the rest of the information
yeah.
as it comes in.
Folks on both sides of the political spectrum will see some conciliationist or reconciler, anybody in the middle, as problematic
Oh
because
yeah, people hate him for that reason too.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, because he's telling the people on the far left that the conservatives are not as irrational or insane
right.
as we think that they. And similarly, he's telling and Jordan Peterson has the same problem. He says, well, we need conservatives and we also need radicals. We need hierarchy and we also need change to hierarchy. And so like people on both sides are like, what? No, we only need our side. The other side is wrong. So you must be one of them in disguise.
Right, right. It is like a paranoid.
Yeah.
Oh, you're a wolf. You're not a sheep, are you? You're definitely a wolf over there. Yeah. But we do that so it's so subtle and so Height actually has a good article that was in the Atlantic that talked about part of the new problem of the internet is it speeds up the rate at which like a mob view forms. So before information would be slow enough that like by the time the crazy argument got to you, you'd like go like, oh, get away from me. But now all of the nodes talk so quickly that the crazy argument gets to the top, the emotionally charged, nonsensical argument, and it like blinds, definitely blinds everything, and then it becomes like a norm and a consensus that then starts like enacting the normativity of the culture. And whereas like even the Supreme Court, right, they've never been as controversial, and they were supposed to be the slowest branch of government, but like the Republican Party and the Democrats, if they could have, gamified the whole system and they turned it strategically into like, oh, we're going to do this, and it's become such like a strategic race where in Magic the Gathering, which I played professionally, they had like metagaming, and the metagame would like breed in such a way that only the most extreme survived, and then they would become so dominant that new novelty would not be able to compete. But then like I always like to like figure out problems, and so sometimes I would like oh, there's the very subtle way to kind of dominate these two kind of glass cannons or the 5 glass cannons or whatever that couldn't exist in a slower, like because before the internet you play competitive cards and they'd come out and good ideas would stay local and then a big tournament happened and some would spread back out. But now like the meta games get figured out like before the sets are released, and so
My son,
novelty, it's so interesting. Yeah.
my son, who is 33 and a half, when he was a teenager, he was big on magic.
Yeah, yeah.
and
I was
he
like nationally rated. I was one of the 25 best people in the country at one time.
yeah. I don't know about his rating, but I remember he won a trip to a tournament out in San Diego
Yeah,
and
yeah.
a college scholarship from being really good at
I
magic.
did too. Yeah, that's the
Yeah, and
same
I
exact
went, I
thing.
brought him out there because he was only like 15 or something at
Oh,
the.
that's awesome. Like Pro Tour San Diego or something like that, or
Yeah,
Grand Prix
yeah.
San Diego. Yeah.
It was fun. Yeah, we got a free vacation in San Diego. Well, I had to pay for my ticket, but
Well, that's really cool. They were actually an ethical company because they wanted to give people under 18 college scholarships instead of
yeah,
cash. It
yeah,
was so because that's what like they were nerds. They weren't business people,
yeah. It
and
was
they
really
actually did some
cool.
really cool things. Yeah, you'd win like tours to their office, and yeah, they were super down to earth. Richard Garfield is the inventor, and he wasn't trying to make like a Hasbro dominating toy. He was like, oh, my Dungeon and Dragon friends, they could play cards while they're like smoking cigarettes and taking a break. And then it became this phenomenon. Yeah, I was in like the early days. I owned, do you know the Black Lotus?
I don't remember. I don't
It's
remember.
the rarest card. They're worth 150 grand now. They're so rare. Like I've owned 5 of them or 10 of them or yeah, like I was in the very basement of that. Um, and it was kind of cool because it's really like kind of what we're in with the liminal web. It's a subculture that has its own like people within it, and you don't see a lot of subcultures today. So it was cool that I could kind of relate that to what we're doing now. It's the same, like we're much nerdier than we give ourselves credit for, and we're like those magic nerds that would go to San Diego with their dads and uh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting little connection between you and my son.
Yeah, no, that's stellar. Yeah, it was a really precious time in my
Well,
life, and it was
I
cool.
have one deck of magic cards somewhere in a box that I saved
Yeah.
from then. I don't know if there's
Ah,
anything valuable in there. I have to go.
probably. Yeah, if it's from a certain period of time. I mean, there's
It's
cards
from,
like I was saying worth 150 grand.
it's from the early, he got in on it, I think, right around the beginning. I don't know. What year did that become a thing? Do you remember?
92, 93, like 91 maybe is the first year. I'm
Okay,
guessing.
no, I think maybe he was 2 or 3 years after it started that he got. He
Okay.
was about 9 or 10, I think, by the time he got involved in it. And I think
So like
it.
97, 96.
He was born in '87.
So when he was 9 or 10, he was like 97,
Yeah, yeah.
96. Yeah. Yeah. By then it had gotten a lot less rare. Some of the cards from like 2 or 3 years before then are now like, because they had this policy, they made a set of all reprints and it angered the collectors because they like cheapened. I knew people that had just like these 30 and $40 cards that became 15-cent cards because they overprinted this reprint collection. So then as a response to that, they created this reserve list and they gave it some lawyerly authority. So there's cards from like before that time that they've never reprinted in paper that because of like people quitting and house flooding and all of the wear and tear, they just don't exist anymore, but they're still in playable formats. And so I had a deck of cards that at the time was worth $1,000 that if I owned it today, I'm sure would be like $1 million for the cards
Wow.
easily. Yeah, I have a friend who runs a shop not far from me, and he just picks that stuff up and never resells it. He sells baseball cards and stuff too, and I'm sure he's sitting on just like ungodly amount of money. Like it's not even like just hundreds of thousands, if not millions and millions of dollars, because they have this like they refuse to break it. They really should have, and they've had opportunities, but there's like these cards. They were so stupidly powerful and they never allowed them to reprint and people just have this affinity for them, and now in the digital world they're even like there's a secondary market where people are pulling them out of print even faster as speculative investments. There's all sorts of investors that have like real financial backing. Yeah, I played for fun. Like I played, just as like a 13-year-old, and I was smart and good, and I was like, oh, this is great. I love economics. I was always trading, and it was cool because I traveled a lot. My mom would just let me hang out. I don't know why. She let me hang out with these like 25-year-olds, and I saw the whole country and competed with people twice my age and just won all the time. Like they had a chess elo rating, and for like 7 years I was in the top 25 people. uh, it was awesome. It was really fun.
Yeah, no, my son loved it too. It was just a hobby for him. He
It's
really,
great for kids, like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff, like um because it also keeps your innocence. It's like instead of getting into like smoking and being a jaded teenager, you can just like play this little Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings game with your friends. And
I remember him explaining all the rules to me and all the different symbols on the cards and what powers went with what, and the strategies. And I remember thinking, this is as complicated as chess.
oh yeah, it's great for cognitive development and
It's
critical
really, yeah,
thinking
that's
and
why I
stuff.
was happy that he was doing it. I was like,
Yeah,
keep
yeah.
exercising that brain, man. This is good for you.
Yeah, and artistic creative stuff too. Like you
Yeah.
don't appreciate how like smart someone could be. Like even John's maybe a great example, but not like artistic outwardly. But if he played all this like the creative stuff, he'd be like, oh, I love drawing, I love elves, I love um that whole imaginal space. It was really, really positive. And it's cool too, because from like a game theoretic standpoint, there are like optimal decisions. So you really are practicing like chess and like, okay, these are the cards in play. They have two cards. I've seen these 8 pieces of information. These are impossible to happen based on the behavior. These are also impossible. This has to be the optimal move, because a lot of friends I had became like pro poker players when that boom happened, because they had all of this kind of strategic knowledge from this little kid game.
Right.
Yeah, it was
And
fun.
I remember being very impressed with the complexity of the reasoning that my son would explain to me.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, holy shit. Uh, I don't think I could pick that up at my age.
It was very like thinking, like, and not knowledge, right? It was more like fluid intelligence, not
Yeah.
crystallized intelligence. Uh, yeah, because a lot of the Hall of Fame, they had a Hall of Fame, and they became lawyers and doctors and entrepreneurs. Like not just like all the best players were also good at like thinking in life.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
It's kind of logical procedural strategies that were complex, complex symbol manipulation and logic and inference, prediction, probability estimates, all sorts of
yeah,
skill.
real feedback. Because like
Yeah,
if you do the wrong thing, you lose, and if you do the right thing, you win. And yeah, all the feedback is pretty cool too. Yeah.
yeah. And well, also the social dimension of it,
Oh, that was the best. Again, that's like why I love
social
friendship.
emotional
And
skills by playing with people and being a sore loser or a good loser and all
oh
that.
yeah, yeah, I've seen some horrible cases of like bad social behaviors, especially when it was smaller. It didn't happen as much, but when it became more popular, you'd see like just kind of awkward people get violent or get rude. And
Angry,
um, yeah,
resentful.
yeah. The opposite though, the good social things, like yeah, sportsmanship was definitely important,
Right.
especially among most of the best players. Although there was some good cheating too. There were some people that learned how to become excellent cheaters. Like they would pull the card off of like secret places or leave things. There was a famous, like, it's in Wikipedia even. This guy cheated at like the biggest event, and I was there for this event when he was putting cards on his lap, and then like no one had thought to do that, so no one was really watching for it, and then he got caught later. Yeah, it's so interesting to gotta watch out for those smart people.
Yeah. All right, Robert.
It's been so fun, Rick.
Yes, likewise. It's around dinner time. My wife and daughter I smell something out there being cooked. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is great. If
yeah,
you do need any Phil Morris stuff, just reach out. I'll see you literally tomorrow, I
tomorrow. Oh, right, I forgot about
think.
that. No, it's in my calendar. So yeah, that'll be
Uh-huh.
all right,
Very
man.
good, sir.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, it's great to see you.
Hey, I don't. You know what? I recorded this just so that I could look at the training.
Oh yeah, you want to put it online?
But no, but I'll send it to you, and so you could delete the whole thing about the training.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I recorded it so I would remember what you showed
Oh,
me
that's
when I
great.
get
Yeah,
the
yeah,
training.
yeah.
But after that, we had a lot of really interesting conversations. So
Yeah, we can podcast it.
take a look at it. All right, see if you want to use part of it or any of it.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's such a. I'm glad you remembered that.
All right, man. Take care.
All right, see you, Rick. It's great to see
Yeah,
you.
likewise.